Hey everyone, I'm Paul Bertorelli reporting for AVweb. In case you're not familiar, this is a Sea Ray, specifically a Sea Ray Elite. You can buy it as a kit airplane or as a fully assembled light sport aircraft. With 115 horsepower Rotax 914 and a light gross weight, the thing hops right off the water and cruises at about 100 miles per hour. We're parked at the Seaplane base on Lake Dora in Tavares, Florida, where I've come to add a light sport seaplane privileges to my certificate. Jones Brothers Air and Seaplane Adventures is based here, and they provide the training. But the Sport Pilot rule has introduced a wrinkle of sorts into the training, and, well, I'll let Rob Galloway explain it.
Okay, through the magic of nonlinear editing, I'm actually at the end of my seaplane training. So Rob, one thing I wanted to talk about was the difference between the Sport Pilot and the regular rating for a seaplane. Now that we have Sport Pilot, we have had for a few years, you have a choice. And they're different, even though the training's similar, there are different processes to get there. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure, yeah. So like you mentioned, to begin with, the training is basically identical. We're going to go, if someone comes to us for a Sport Pilot single engine C endorsement or a private or commercial single engine C rating, we're still going to do the exact same training. The difference comes at the end of the training when it's time for a proficiency check or a check ride. So if someone is a Sport Pilot or a private or commercial or ATP pilot but wants to do a single engine C rating at Sport Pilot privileges, they're going to take a proficiency check with an instructor. If someone wants to get an added class rating as a private or commercial, they'll do a check ride with an FAA designated examiner.
Okay, so I've chosen to go the Sport Pilot route. So this is one thing I didn't realize. It is an endorsement. It's like a high-performance endorsement, but you get a new certificate, so you have to fill out the Form 8700 and send that into the FAA. Then you get back a new certificate. So that's what makes it different than a normal endorsement. So for me, if I wanted to get the class edition, all I'd have to do is ride with an FAA examiner, right?
Exactly. Yep.
So they've already done everything.
That would be the only difference. We would fill out a different 8710 form for the added class, and you take a ride with an examiner instead of an instructor.
The training requires about 5 hours of flying, typically over 2 or 3 days. Right from the start, it focuses on the most important thing for an amphib pilot, not landing on the water with the wheels down. If you do that, it will just ruin your whole day, and probably the airplane too. If you don't drown, you might wish you did for the embarrassment. Galloway's mnemonic, which I've used dozens of times, is GIFT with 2 F's. That's gear, instruments, fuel pumps, flaps, and trim. And for the gear, you can't just say it, but you need to look out over your shoulder and make sure the gear is where it ought to be. Easy to do in a Sea Ray. But first, the ultimate act of faith. Driving an airplane down a ramp into the water and accepting that, yes, it'll float. It does, and yeah, there's not much freeboard there, but if the waves break over the cockpit rail, it's too windy to fly anyway. Takeoffs in an amphib are sort of the opposite of a tri-gear land plane. With the power rapidly advanced, the stick goes full forward until the nose climbs out of the water, then comes gently back to allow the hull to pop onto the step. The rest is just eye, hand, and feel. The airplane will fly off when it's ready. With even the slightest wave action, that last part of the takeoff run will be bumpy, but the hull is designed to survive it, and anyway, we have these flotation vests. Seaplane training is all about the interface between the water surface and the air, so there's no point in climbing above 500 feet. No air work, no stalls, no instrument work, just perfecting, finessing that final 6 inches before the hull slides into the water. What takes getting used to in the Sea Ray is how low the landing flare actually happens. As you can see, your feet are actually below the waterline when taxiing, so the flare height isn't much above that. The trick is to let the airplane settle until you're sure it's going to submarine to the bottom of the lake, then wait another second, and that'll be about right. I'd say half the training time is spent working on glassy water landings. Glassy water is a challenge for seaplane pilots because the surface is featureless, making it difficult to judge altitude for the flare. In this landing, we're using that boat wake to good advantage. It stirred up the water, and even those small waves help with the landing flare. Otherwise, the idea is to set the airplane in the landing attitude, set the power for 100 feet per minute descent, and just wait for it. It takes patience, patience, and more patience.
So let's do one more glassy water landing into Lake Dora from a kind of a high altitude. We'll come in and we'll set our pitch at, a couple few hundred feet, and we'll ride it all the way down. That just, again, that's a good exercise to give you patience of just letting the airplane come down. It might take, a minute or longer.
And we'll call this a left base?
That sounds good to me.
Okay. Gift check. Gear is up. We're landing on the water. Instruments are all in the green. The fuel pumps are on. First notch of flaps. There's the landing pitch.
Just leave the power where it is.
Okay, and get a little balloon there, but that'll bleed off, which it's doing. Pretty good descent, right? A little bit too much power.
Yep, so just make a
Did you want to lock?
And don't let that nose drop. Just keep on it. It has a tendency when you get low to want to kind of drop a little bit. There it is, nice.
One trick to get a good hack on altitude before committing to the landing attitude is to fly low over a reference object like trees or seaweed, then set up the attitude as low as possible. Since so much of seaplane flying is low altitude work, we spend a lot of time just flying low over the water to lock in that sight picture. That helps with polishing glassy water landings. Taxiing a seaplane on the water is so divorced from anything to do with land planes that it's hard to know where to start.
There's really three kinds of taxiing. Idle taxi, which is what we're doing now. That's what you're going to use like 95% of the time. Positioning yourself for a takeoff. Taxiing in and out of a ramping situation. Step taxiing, you're going to use just to get somewhere faster. So we get the airplane planed out on top of the water on the step, as we call it, and get from A to B faster, or use it in a confined area situation to gain some airspeed and turn it into a takeoff. Well, there's a third kind of taxi that's kind of in between the two, called plow taxi. And it's really the transition, when we add power, the nose pitches up and we're plowing through the water. So it's the transition from idle to step. You don't ever really want to leave the airplane in that position. It's the most drag configuration you have, so you're not gaining a whole lot. Plus you've got poor engine cooling, poor visibility. I mean, there's nothing really good about it.
Then what's the advantage of it?
So the advantage, more so on floats than in a sea ray, is when you do get that nose pitched up in a heavier wind situation like what we've got today, when we're having a hard time turning from into the wind to downwind. In a float plane, you can get the nose pitched up and start to make your turn, and you shift your center of buoyancy from here aft, and when the nose pitches up, it totally reverses the weather vaning of the airplane. So now, instead of the wind blowing the tail around, your pivot points move aft, and now the wind is blowing the nose around and helps you make a turn to downwind.
Rob mentioned the weather vaning tendency and the difficulty in turning downwind. And that gets us to ramping, which has no land plane analog. Ramping is no big deal in calm wind, but in a crosswind, or especially a tailwind, the airplane can be a handful because it wants to weather vane. A weak cold front passed through while we were flying, and the wind kicked up to at least 15 knots. That put us into a quartering downwind to the ramp, minimizing rudder effectiveness and exerting a strong weather vaning moment. To improve the rudder bite, adding power helps, but that increases the speed, and if you hit the ramp too fast, you can dump the airplane on its nose.
We'll do, when we get up here, I'm going to put the gear down for you so you don't have to take your hands off. This is kind of one of those help each other out kind of situations.
You can't see it on the camera. I've got the camera recording here, but we're taxiing downwind in what, 10, 12 knots maybe?
Oh, I'd say more than that. That windsock's almost straight out, and that's a 20-mile-per-hour.
The bow wave coming across the front of the airplane, and it takes everything I can do to hold it with rudder and a little bit of power. And we're trying to ramp the airplane.
At least 15, if not 18. Now remember, just before we hit the ramp, come back on the power so we don't dump it over.
Okay.
Just a little bit, and then go right back into it, nice and easy. All right, gears coming down.
Okay. Power coming back.
Just a little bit. There we go. Now go right back into it. Good job. That was excellent.
Jesus Christ. A totally new experience.
Yeah. That's almost beyond the limits of this airplane.
But it wasn't beyond the airplane's abilities, although it surely tested mine. Later in the day, the wind subsided, and I actually found a little almost glassy water for my proficiency ride, and ultimately, the Sport Pilot Seaplane endorsement.
You've owned Jones Brothers Aviation here in Tavares for a couple years, been here for 5 years. You've got some packages for training pilots and seaplane ratings. Tell us what they are, what they cost.
Sure, absolutely. We usually do our training over a 3-day period. It can be done in 2 days, but we like to have people plan a third day just in case there's weather issues. End up with about 5 hours of flight time. Our training costs $1,795, again for 5 hours of flight time, plus the check ride. So we do actually have packages that include the hotel stay, the check ride examiner's fee, and typically with the package we'll fly in somewhere for lunch while we're out training, and we pick up lunch as part of that too. So those the package is $24.95, includes everything.
And you've got the choice. You've got a Sea Ray here for that. You've got a 206. You've got a 185. Thinking about adding other airplanes?
We've also got a Cessna 140.
Okay.
And that actually, the rate on the 140 is a little bit less, so we can jump in the 140 and do a rating for $12.95 instead of $17.95.
Okay. So I've done it in the Sea Ray, and I found it's been great. I think it's an excellent training airplane. It doesn't really have any bad habits, and best of all, it's got reasonable performance getting off the water and on the water. And a lot of fun to fly.
Oh, it's some of the most fun flying you'll ever do. And the Sea Ray, particularly with the Rotax 914 turbo we've got on it, it really performs well off the water. Great climb performance.
All right, so we're going to go flying again.
All right, let's do it.
You can find out more about Jones Brothers at jonesairandc.com and about Sea Ray at searay.com. That's SEAREY.com. I'm Paul Bertorelli reporting. Thanks for watching.